Welcome to the Lula Growth Series. I'm Comfort Chabalala, digital content specialist at Brand Story, and today we are exploring a business paradox that's caught thousands of South African SMEs off guard: the growth trap. Joining me is Thomas McKinnon, Chief Growth Officer at Lula, who's about to explain why rapid growth can actually kill your cash flow, and more importantly, what you can do about it. Thomas, you've said that growth can kill cash flow. That sounds counterintuitive. Can you paint us a picture of what this looks like?
Hey, Comfort. Yeah, sure thing. So I think that there's this misconception that all growth is good, and that's just not true. And so there is this thing like a growth trap for SMEs or for businesses overall, where you're not just scaling the business, you're driving revenue's increasing. But if your costs are increasing at the same rate or even greater, that's not good growth. That's not sustainable growth. Ultimately, there's a difference between growing a business and scaling a business. And where you want to be is scaling a business, where your revenue is increasing exponentially and your costs, what it actually costs you to serve your customers or to deliver that business, is only increasing incrementally, right? And so this idea of a growth trap, it happens when businesses get stuck in linear growth.
Before we dive deeper, tell our listeners a bit about yourself, your role at Lula, what you do or what you see on a day-to-day rather in terms of SME growth challenges.
Great. So I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Lula. I mean, that sounds more interesting than it is. I focus on our customer side of the business. So I look after the marketing, sales, customer experience, and product teams. And everything that I do is focused around, how might we grow our business sustainably and how might we scale our business? And so that's the core focus of my role. At Lula, we started out 10 years ago now as a funder. Our founders set out to fund businesses and kind of fill this credit gap in South Africa that businesses experience. We've evolved into a kind of a full banking platform where we've got funding as well as banking services. And really our core objective is to help SMEs succeed in South Africa, help them grow. Cash flow, growth, they're very much the purpose of Lula, and helping other businesses realize that as we realize that ourselves.
So let's break this down. You mentioned a growth trap. What exactly is happening when a business is growing but struggling financially?
Yeah, so this idea of a growth trap, let's say you're a successful business. You're signing new deals. You're acquiring new customers. Your revenue, what you're billing, what you're invoicing, the sales that you're doing are increasing massively. And that's a huge win as a business, right? That's what you want to do. That's what, the idea of success is. But that can create kind of a cash flow crisis. And it's very different things. And so what ends up happening is that cash is moving out the door. You get a big order in, you land that big fish, that whale, whatever you want to call it. You've got this massive business deal going, and you need to now start spending cash to deliver on that deal. You need to spend money to make money, right? As the old saying goes. But at the same time, what's happening is that the cash coming in the door is getting delayed. Those big customers, what are they going to ask you for? They're going to ask you for discounts. They're going to ask you for terms. They're going to want to pay you over 30, 60, or 90 days. And what this creates is you've got this double whammy where you've got more cash going out the door faster, and the money that's coming in is slowing down. And then you don't really figure out ways to slow down that cash burn, maybe get terms with your own suppliers, that sort of thing. And that's the working capital cycle. And so while you're signing more deals than ever, your profit and loss statement might look pretty good, your bank account's going to be empty, and that's going to be a really tough position to be in. In the sales sense, you're super successful, but in terms of managing the P&L of the business, you're struggling, right?
So what I'm hearing you say is that as working capital demands increase with growth, can you explain this in simple terms for our SME listeners?
Very simple explanation. You need cash. You need liquid in your bank account in order to basically operate on a day-to-day basis. And so your working capital is basically, in accounting terms would be your current assets, minus your current liabilities. So your current assets is very much, what do you have in the bank account right now? What do your customers owe you that you can collect on in the near term? And what stock do you have on hand that you can turn into cash pretty quickly? And then on the liability side, it's really, you probably owe other people money. You've got payables coming up soon. You've got short-term loans. You've got to pay your staff. Maybe you got some taxes coming up. And so the way this works is it really doesn't matter what industry we're talking about here, but you're basically having to spend to bring money in. Your sales have increased massively, but so have those costs to deliver. Even a bad scenario would be your sales have increased a lot. You've 10x sales, but if your cost base is 10x and you're taking 3 times longer to bring that money in, that's not helpful. And so really you've got to manage that working capital effectively. You've got to make sure that the money that you're bringing in and how quickly you're bringing it in outpaces the money that you're spending and how fast that's going out the door. That's not always possible naturally. And sometimes it does make sense to go out there and get that funding. But growth amplifies the amount of cash that gets tied up in your inventory and your receivables. And that extends that time that you need working capital where you need cash that you don't have in your bank account right now.
So if I'm an SME owner listening to this, what are the red flags I should be watching for? I mean, what tells me that I might be heading into this growth trap?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a few. I think there are the financial flags. People that are really on top of their cash flow, managing their business effectively, would probably see those financial impacts. So the most obvious or kind of the classic one is your sales and your revenue is growing, but your profit margins are shrinking. You're selling more, but you're actually making less profit out of that. Also, when you constantly feel that cash flow crunch, so you've got a lot of sales going out the door, but you month on month you're seeing that you just don't have the money in the account, or you're kind of redlining it a lot. We see a bit of that redlining behavior where sometimes it makes sense, but where a business is spending all the cash that they have, even going into the red, taking out funding to float that growth, but never really catching up. At some point, that's got to go. You've got to move out of that. Relying on kind of credit, overdrafts, especially really short-term credit, so overdrafts, credit cards, personal credit to pay for just core costs like payroll or rent, or where you're just getting later and later on paying your suppliers and you're not putting agreements in place, and you're basically tarnishing your reputation with your own supply chain. There are other red flags. I mean, some of these, not everybody's going to be on top of the financials, and so there are definitely other red flags. So where customers start complaining more, or you start seeing mistakes increasing operationally. So you're starting to mess up some of the orders. You're sending your orders to the wrong places, or you're sending out the wrong invoices, and things are just feeling a little chaotic. And just that feeling of constantly fighting fires. There's definitely that sense of having to fight a fire. And that comes from just, if you're growing, your business is just getting more complicated. There's complexity. And if you're not creating systems to help scale, then everybody's kind of running around like a little bit of a headless chicken. And in those scenarios, I guess the other red flags is when the good people start leaving the business, or you're bringing in a lot of people, but it's just creating a lot of noise and more panic than actual productivity. So yeah, I think there are a lot of red flags. In large part, they can be financial, but also there's just that feeling that the business is a little more fragile than it should be, or there's a little too much chaos that isn't controlled or can't be brought under control, in a short period of time.
So would you say that there are hidden costs that business owners typically don't factor in when planning for growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we talk about your revenue having to really scale, but you only want kind of your cost base to increase incrementally. You don't want it to scale at the same pace. And as you grow, new costs do come in. I mentioned that the business just gets more complicated to operate. You're going to need new systems, new software, more people to handle the work. But ultimately, that comes at a cost. And it's not just the cost of bringing people in or hiring systems or platforms to do things for you, there is an efficiency there that makes you slow down, where there are mistakes that creep in that are going to cost you. The other thing is just as you're hiring more staff, a core team at a small business, there's often passion and they know what they're doing. They know why they're there. But as soon as you start growing, you are going to hire people that are, they are just looking for a job, and that's fine. But, without that passion and that focus, again, things become less efficient. And so you don't get as much productivity. You do get like more mistakes that creep in. And sometimes you make a bad hire or two, and that impacts productivity because it impacts morale. And then the other one, I guess, is brand damage. So when customers start walking away from you, maybe you're scaling, maybe you're signing more sales, but is that long term? Are your customers happy? Is your reputation still what it was before you started to grow? And so thinking about how you build systems in that protect that part of the business. And then obviously, as there is technical and operational debt, what kind of got you here won't get you there. And so you're constantly trying to shoehorn systems or processes to make sure that you can continue delivering, and you kind of want to sweat those assets, but it does lead to more inefficiencies, and those become quite expensive to fix later on. And then I guess like one of the biggest hidden costs, and probably the one with the most impact, it's pretty stressful running a business. If you're a business owner, you're kind of growing quickly, cash flow is always a concern, you've got a lot of staff that you need to pay, you've got people chasing you for money, and you're chasing people for money. That's stressful. I mean, it's a pretty stressful job to run a business, and this can lead to the business owner, just getting tired. I mean, is that word burnout? But it's just tired. You don't have as much energy to focus on the things that really matter in the business, and you're just consumed with activity and fighting fires. That's a real cost to the business and to its future.
So what advice would you give an entrepreneur who is in a similar situation where they are facing burnout and they kind of feeling stuck and not knowing how to move forward?
Yeah, look, I think probably the easiest thing, the most actionable thing that you can do is just get on top of your cash flow, like understand it. Don't hide away from it. You don't have to do this massive multi-year business plan to get on top of this. You can keep it like pretty focused on the next 90 days. That's a good kind of amount of time because it's not just month to month. It lets you be a little more strategic in your thinking, and it kind of bridges that month to month survival timeline with a longer term kind of strategic outlook. And it's pretty simple to do. You just look at your current cash balance. You kind of project when your money's going to be coming in, and just being like really, really realistic about that. It's important not to put yourself in the place where you're trying to borrow money when you don't absolutely have any at all. That's not a good position to be in. You kind of want to be strategic and smart about this.
So you talk about the 90-day rolling forecast. Most of our SMEs are just trying to get through the month. And why is 90 days the magic number?
That 90 days number is quite agile. It's short enough that you can actually be accurate without being kind of like an absolute spreadsheet whiz or an accountant. You can keep on top of your books. You can keep on top of your cash position. But it's also long enough that you can see where issues are coming in, where you can actually make decisions ahead of time to say, I'm not going to make that hire, or I'm going to delay that purchase. To be successful, you're going to have to do that yourself or get someone that can do that for you. It's imperative. Otherwise, you're probably not going to last in the market that long. I think the 10-year survival rate for businesses is less than 30%. So most businesses that start up within 10 years are not going to be around anymore. And a lot of that has got to do with this kind of doom loop or this growth trap that they find themselves in. And that 90 days, you don't have to look 10 years out. That 90 days and just making strategic decisions as you go, lifting your gaze from just the end of the month really can make a difference.
Thank you so much for that. When business owners start depending on overdrafts or credit cards to cover costs, what should that signal rather to them?
Yeah, look, I think if you're taking out short-term credit or a really expensive credit, you're using personal credit to cover core costs like payroll or rent. You're not using it to buy inventory that you're going to turn into money, for instance. I think that is a problem. I think what it signals is that the operating model isn't working for you. Your costs are too high. You're not finding economies of scale, as they would say. And so that basically also signals that things are getting more expensive for you. So it's not just that your costs aren't coming down, like your core input costs, you're adding new costs, like interest rates that you have to pay because you've taken out funding and that's destroying your margins. And so I think that's the next signal. And then it really masks a problem. And so if you're using short-term credit and you don't really have a plan on how to get out of that cycle, it really is just treating what's happening this month, and it allows you to delay things. It allows you to keep fighting those fires, but it doesn't allow you to find that cash flow positive, that real scaling instead of just linear growth. And then the other thing I think is not just what it signals to you as a business, it's what it signals to the market out there. So if you're looking for funding, any decent lender, any responsible lender out there, even your customers that might, or your suppliers that might provide you with terms, it kind of signals poor financial management and high risk. And so the chances are getting future money that you borrow is going to get more expensive, or you're going to be able to afford less of it. And that's a bad spiral to be in. And so really, it's a big signal that you're not going to be able to afford to fund it in that way on a short-term basis for very long.
When it comes to scaling operations, where should SMEs prioritize their investments, either in staff or systems?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think like any good answer, it depends, right? You've got to understand why you're hiring staff first. So if you're hiring staff to scale up a process that you have or to leverage a system that allows you to scale, then it would be kind of system before staff. But if you're trying to hire staff to make strategic decisions or to help you in like very specific parts of the business to make those maybe system choices or process choices, then it's definitely people first. So I think it's understanding the roles that you need and making that distinction between, is this a role that helps me unlock sustainable growth, make decisions that are strategic, manage that 90-day cash flow forecast basically in some way, either by helping me bring money in faster, helping me manage my costs more effectively, etc.? Or is it somebody that's there to facilitate a process of doing more sales or buying more stock? If it's part of a process to deliver your core, I think you'd go systems first and then start hiring the staff to scale it. That said, before staff or systems, what's the process? What's the operating model that gets me to where I want to be? And deciding from there, is it staff or system?
So if someone is listening and has already fallen into the growth trap, what's their first step out?
Yeah, so interesting one. Before we talk about what's the first step, it's understanding where you want to be. And that's finding yourself in a cash flow positive state at some point, or where you can at least foresee you're going to be that in a cash flow positive state. If you take the decision to grow and maybe drop below that point, right? To fund that growth with money that's not in the bank account right now, then the wrong move is selling your way out of it, like growing your way out of it. So if you are in a growth trap whereby there's more money going out the door than there's coming in, and you believe you can trade your way out of that, that's probably not going to happen unless you have got a strategic plan in place. And so I think the first step is to stop or optimize spending on non-essential stuff. So really take that step back. If you got your 90-day cash flow forecast, your plan, is to understand where you're fighting fires and try to stop fighting those fires. And that doesn't mean like slow down or stop at all. It just means understand what you need to press pause on. what you need to stop doing and stop that immediately. And then it's to build that cash flow forecast, that 90-day cash flow forecast. Give yourself visibility. Create a little bit of clarity on where the problems are coming up. So be pretty brutal, pretty ruthless about answering these. Have you got customers that are losing you money that just aren't kind of worth keeping on? Have you got suppliers that are just overcharging you and not really allowing you to pass terms on? And then take action on it. This doesn't mean, again, that you have to stop to stabilize. Stabilizing doesn't mean stop. But once you've kind of paused the things that really aren't adding value or just creating activity, once you've analyzed and seen, okay, here's the top 3 or 4 things I should be doing to kind of stop the bleeding a little bit, you can stabilize and keep growing. But, that stabilizing bit is aggressively chasing those overdue invoices, not increasing terms or giving too much room where you don't have that room, and then just optimizing that cost base. Yes, you can do more sales, but you need to make sure that you're managing the cost of the sale and those fixed costs. You can't let your fixed costs scale up with the growth of the business. It should be incremental.
So interesting. I hear you mention that growing your way out of the growth trap being a bad idea. So what would you tell an entrepreneur who finds themselves in that space where they are in a growth trap and the business is suddenly booming? What should be the first step that they take?
Yeah, I think first off is stop reading all those dreamy stories about those big businesses overseas that are growing phenomenally well and they're venture backed and they've got all the money in the world and thinking that you can operate in the same way. The reality is a lot of those businesses, you don't see it, but profit and profitability and being cash flow positive is not a big deal for them. Profit is kind of seen like a growth limiter. It's something that it's an artificial growth limiter. To have to be profitable is going to slow you down. But in South Africa, I mean, that's just not the reality for the vast majority of SMEs. Profit and seeing your path to profitability is super important. You can't miss that. Like that's our market. Things change here fast. And so my key message would be revenue's wonderful, but zero in on profit. Understand if it is in fact profitable the way you're operating. And then having a bank balance, cash in the bank is absolutely key. It's king. And so don't chase growth for its own sake. You need to make sure that you can survive and grow. And then by all means grow. Once you find that, scale aggressively, then do your sales, figure out how to grow more. But don't do that without a clear plan in place to be profitable.
If you could leave our SME listeners with one key message about sustainable growth, what would it be?
Yeah, cash is king. I think that's, it's an easy one to remember. Don't burn yourself out chasing revenue. Make sure that things are healthy in the business. That's a responsibility of working on the business and not in the business. You do carry a responsibility as a business owner to bring that sanity, to bring that clarity, and stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, remember, growth is good, but sustainable growth is everything. Thank you for joining us on the Lula Growth Series. Until next time, bye-bye.